Hi, my name is Dr. Frank A. Thomas, and this is another wonderful installment of the African American Preaching Legacy Series, where we bring you the very best in African American preaching for conversation, for discussion, and oftentimes God shows up when we're doing these interviews. Today, my very special guest is the Reverend Dr. Lance D. Watson,
Yes.
pastor of St. Paul Baptist Church of Richmond, Virginia.
Yes.
And we go back many moons to starting young churches, many moons. So I am honored and privileged to have him as our special guest. So we welcome you, and we just thank you for being here and being a part of this series. We've been waiting on you. So we're excited that you're here.
Well, it's good to be here, and I want to thank you for inviting me. I don't feel worthy, but I am honored to be a part of this series. I haven't seen so many of the others who have come before, and just to be named in that august assembly.
Well, you are an august preacher, so we're glad to have you. So there might be a few people out there, not many, who don't know who Lance D. Watson is. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Let's see. I'd like to say that I'm the son of Rosamond and Doretha Watson, who together brought 17 kids into the world, and I was number 15.
Wow.
I am the husband of Rose Wilder, who is an amazing, intelligent, beautiful woman. I hope she hears this interview. I am the father of Lance, Rachel, and Damon, and I am the grandfather of Kaylee, Lance III, Rachel, EJ, and my baby girl, Avia, who is my youngest son's daughter.
Wow.
And I serve the St. Paul's Baptist Church in Central Virginia. It's one church, 3 different locations. Well, a 4th now because of the pandemic. We're St. Paul's everywhere by way of technology. And I've been there for 38 years, if the Lord allows me to remain until the fall of this year. And it's been an amazing journey. And I'm a lover of preaching, and I'm a lover of the church, and a defender of the church, and a defender of preaching.
Wow. Well, I remember so much of the journey. I remember back in the school, you were kind to invite me to come. I remember. So let's get right to it, because, I also know we have a whole lot of mentorship folks in common. So tell me about some of your preaching mentors.
Well, I was raised in Detroit. And this is Detroit, 1960, 1970. And it was a mecca of major preachers. I mean, it still is. But in the 1960s and 70s, the landscape was dominated by major preaching. You could go any place, anywhere, and you were going to be in the shadow of one of these major preachers. Preachers like Dr. Frederick Sampson, who I'll talk about a little bit later, Dr. Charles Gilchrist Adams, you had Dr. Cornell Talley. On a different side of the preaching spectrum, you had Dr. C.L. Franklin, you had Dr. J. Allen Caldwell, and so many others, who were, Dr. James Perkins is there, just legacy preachers, whose influence was spread far and wide. I was raised or born on the west side of Detroit, and so the churches that anchored our community were Tabernacle Baptist Church, Hartford Memorial Baptist Church, Bailey's Temple Church of God in Christ, and St. John AME, I believe, was the church. And we participated in all of those churches in some way, shape, form, or fashion, because the AME church had the best after-school program. Bailey's Temple was the only one having night service and late night service. We belonged to the Baptist church. So we were raised in a really kind of ecumenical environment. And I was influenced by a lot of preachers. My family belonged to Oakland Avenue Baptist Church, Dr. Willie Wilson, who was out of Mississippi, and that resonated with my grandmama because she was a native of Indianola, Mississippi, as was C.L. Franklin, came out of Mississippi. So you have all of these Mississippi transplants in the North now, you know, who are finding affinity with each other. But I was baptized in Oakland Avenue Baptist Church at 5 years old. And we were there until my parents separated and divorced when I was 11, and we moved to the Far East Side, and then we joined New St. Paul Baptist Church under Pastor Arthur Carruthers. So I was a teenager there, and it was in that transition that I began to feel called to preach. Now, my grandmother recognized something happening in me much earlier than that. And it was probably in the experience I remember is my mother had accused me of doing something that I hadn't done. And I was talking back to her. Well, I was raised in one of my houses, you ain't talk back. And I was saying, no, I didn't do it. And so she said, yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. And she said, if you say it again, I'm going to smack you in the mouth. I said, well, you can smack me right now because I didn't do it and I'm not going to claim it if I didn't do it. And my grandmother saved me from that experience. But I noticed looking back that after that, she started to put me up in church to do speeches and recitations, read the scripture, give prayers. And my grandmother was not a preacher. She would have been if she had been born in this time, but back then the Baptists called them missionaries, right? So she was head of the Missionary Society, and under her leadership, the Missionary Society adopted circles, which was a form of a multi-site ministry. They had 5 circles that went around, you know, to people's houses. And she would put me up to lead the meetings. And now I'm 6, 7 years old, 8 years old, you know, but she's cultivating this ability that she sees in me. So by the time I was 12, I shared with her, I think I'm being called to preach. And she said, well, why is that? And I began to explain to her that that's what I'm doing when I'm standing on the back porch of the house. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, come with me. And so we went out to the back porch and I said, see all my members? She said, you got a big church, don't you? I said, yeah, that's what I'm doing when I'm back here. I'm preaching to the grass, you know. And I would always be the preacher when we played church, me and my brothers and sisters, you know. And I never wanted to be the deacon or the usher or the choir member. I always wanted to be the preacher. And so I started preaching at 12. And my grandmother's close friend, Reverend H.W. Burroughs, was the pastor of Galatian Baptist Church, which was also in that West Side community. And he said, I'll give him a chance, you know. And he put me up on Sunday morning, October 31st, 1971, on Halloween, trick or treat, right? No. But, and this is during the 70s, right? So I'm 12 years old. I mean, what does a 12-year-old know, you know, about any of that, right? And he wasn't seminary trained or anything like that. So he didn't really know what to tell me other than pray and ask God what to say. And so that week, leading up to my initial sermon, the musical Jesus Christ Superstar came to the Fisher Theater. And I said, that's what I'm gonna preach about. And that was the name of my initial sermon. Had about 2 minutes worth of introductory comments and about 15 minutes of screaming and hollering. But after that, the church voted to give me a license at 12, right? And so I started preaching, and then my family moved to the east side. I came under the tutelage of Arthur Carruthers, and he's a great preacher. He wasn't seminary trained, but the boy, I mean, he could hoop you under the table and sing you out the room. I mean, you know, and he had a kind heart for young preachers. So he would put us up to baptize, put you up to preach, put you up to lead, you know. So, and expose you to these various areas of the church. So I was a teenage preacher under him and was the youth minister. And so I was there with him for 6 years, almost 7 years, until I became 17, 18. And I'm graduating high school, I'm going to college, I'm working for Ford Motor Company, and I found my way once I got married, because I married my high school sweetheart, and we were both in churches, and so she said, well, we need to find our church, and she belonged to Eastlake, I belonged to New St. Paul, and her pastor was retiring. And he wanted me to follow him. But I was like, no, I ain't trying to do that, because I was working for Ford at the time and doing very, very well. And he invited Dr. Frederick Sampson to preach his retirement banquet. And he preached this message I'll never forget about, it was called The Clock is Ticking, right? In the way that only he can, right. Okay? And I heard it, and we started going to Tabernacle. And I used to sit all the way, and you preached there in the old Tabernacle. I used to sit all the way up in the back of the balcony, right? And we would listen to him preach, and my wife said, I'm gonna join. And I said, I don't know, maybe we will, maybe we won't. And so I used to come late so that I had to sit in the balcony. And one Sunday we came late, and the balcony was full. And the usher said, I recognize y'all. And she said, I got a seat for you. And she sat us on the front row. And my wife said, this the Sunday, I'm joining. So I joined, and I went right back to the balcony. Dr. Sampson told his administrative assistant, Dr. Oscar Carter, he said, a young preacher joined this church, and he's lost in the crowd. I want you to go find him. And he found me, and that was my first appointment with Doc. So Dr. Sampson was a mentor. Of course, Pastor Carruthers, Pastor Burroughs. There were other mentors from afar, people who were impressive. J. Allen Caldwell, who pastored Burnett Baptist Church, had a heart for and affinity for young preachers. It was through him that I came to know Donald Parson. And Donald Parson in his young days, he was just as fierce then as he is now, And he used to do a street revival, and they would literally have the entire block under a tent. And we would be sitting on trash cans trying to hear Donald Parson preach, man. And now we're talking 50 years ago, Frank, and I can still remember what he preached. He preached, why travel the narrow road? From that text, broad way to narrow way. And I remember his points. I could tell you how he closed. It was that powerful, But I admired him from a distance. My grandmother was great friends with C.L. Franklin. And so we used to go over there every Sunday night. And I don't need to tell you what a phenom C.L. Franklin was. He's probably the only preacher I've ever come across in my entire lifetime who could announce, next Sunday at midnight, I'm gonna preach The Eagle Stirs Her Nest. And if you didn't get there by 10, you wasn't getting in. Right? And he's not coming out until midnight. Right. And his room, it was a converted theater, the old New Bethel. And it would seat every bit of 4,000 people. Wow. And you couldn't get in, and he didn't disappoint, even though people had An Eagle Stirs a Nest on record, and young preachers like me have memorized it, with all of the we knew how to do all that, right? Just the way he did it. It didn't matter. We were gonna be in the room, we were gonna preach it with him, we were gonna shout where we were supposed to shout, and all of that. But he was a phenom, and my grandmother knew him very well. So we used to go over there just about every Sunday night for his broadcast service. And it was through him that I got to know and hear Jasper Williams and James Morton and Paul Morton and people like that, So I had a lot of mentors, but none more prominent in my life than Frederick George Sampson.
Let's drop into that slice.
Okay.
Tell me about Frederick George Sampson.
He was, I'm at a deficit of superlatives to add to him. Mm-hmm. He taught me so much from his own personal life as well as his professional life. Of course, he was a giant of a man, not just in stature, but mentally, intellectually, spiritually, just who he was, right? He had this marvelous mixture of medicine, theology. He pulled from all of the science.
Philosophy.
Yeah, integrated that. Wait, here's one of my earliest memories was him, and this is pre-Princeton Michael Eric Dyson. So this is before the PhD. Right. It's before Wayne State for me. We're young, untried, don't know what we're doing, trying to figure it out. And Dr. Sampson, I can't help, maybe saw something in us that was worth developing. And so he's talking to us, eating sardines out of a can with crackers, talking to us about the Christology of Teilhard de Chardin. and we're nodding like we knew what he was saying. Yeah, right. He related to somebody I know. But he was just a brilliant guy. And for me, I never will forget my first conversation with him. When I came for that appointment, he said, "Tell me about yourself." So I'm talking to him about my background, and by that time I'm working for Ford Motor Company, and I moved on to supervision. And I'm 19 years old on supervision at Ford, right? And I'm making money hand over fist, lots of money. And so I told him about all of that. And I said, "So what do you think, Doc?" And Doc leaned back as only he could. He said, "Well, one thing is for certain. You are clearly impressed with yourself." And I said, "Yeah, but what do you think I ought to do? Do you think I should pursue my ministry or whatever?" And he said, "You should go in Monday and quit." And I'm like, what part of $80,000 did you not hear, right? And so he went on to say, God wouldn't have called you that young in order for you just to work in the factory. God didn't have to call you at all for you to work in the factory. He said, you need to go back to school and get your degree. And I retorted, I got people working for me who got degrees. What I need a degree for? And he said, you misunderstood the assignment. And I'm like, what assignment? I didn't know I had an assignment, right? And he said, the assignment was never the degree. It was you God was trying to develop. And he shared this metaphor, and Doc always talked in stories and pictures, so it stuck with you. And believe it or not, I shared this metaphor with my son, who is an aspiring minister. And the other day I heard him sharing it with a group of young preachers saying, let me tell you, it's like this. So his legacy lives on, but he shared with me, he said, do you like steak? I said, yeah. He said, where you buy steak from? I said, I like to go to the Eastern Market, which is an open air market in Detroit on Gratiot Avenue. And he said, what cut you like? I said, filet mignon, if I can get it, when it's fresh. And he said, okay, let's say you go to Eastern Market, you go to a butcher shop, and you see filet mignon, and you know it's fresh, it's brand new, they just put it out. And you say, give me 2 pounds of that filet mignon. He said, the butcher reaches in with his hand, he grabs a filet mignon, he slaps it on the top of the counter and says, that'll be $5.86. He said, are you happy? I said, no. He said, why not? I said, he didn't handle it right. He didn't package it right. He didn't present it right. And Doc said, that's all school gonna do for you. He said, you already got the raw meat. It just ain't packaged. And so it can't be presented. I've never forgotten that, man, in all of this time. So needless to say, I didn't quit because the money was too good. But Ford lost $1 billion in the fourth quarter in 1979. They had a 50% across the board staff reduction. I was a part of that. They gave me a payout, and I took it, got into school, and never looked back. Of course, by that time, I'm married, and I have children, so I've got an urgency about me, right? And I go to school, and once I let Ford go, I got hired at Tabernacle as Associate Director of Christian Education. The director was Annabelle Johnson, and she had been there 40-some years, you know, so she was effectively pastor in that area of the church, okay, and recognized me as a potential threat when I first came, until I assured her that I had no intentions of, you know, doing anything out of line. But I went from $80,000 a year at Ford to $10,500 a year at Tabernacle. I was getting paid weekly, very weekly, you know, like most preachers, very weekly, okay? But I started working at Tabernacle, and Doc wrote in my job description that I had to be a full-time student because he wanted me to stay focused on that goal. And so I finished one undergrad degree, and then I went back and got a second undergrad degree. Then I got a master's degree in guidance and counseling. There was no accredited seminary in Detroit at that time, so I knew I had to leave. And so I started applying. I didn't want to leave, but it was the next logical step in my progression. And I got accepted at Harvard. And I was going to go to the divinity school until Dr. Sampson messed me up. He invited Dr. David Shannon, who at that time was president of Virginia Union University, to speak as part of Christian Ed Week. And I was assigned to drive him. Right. And one of the great blessings that I had that many young preachers miss now in their hurry is the blessing of the people I met trying to serve Dr. Sampson. You know, that I drove Gardner Taylor, I drove Sam Proctor, I drove Daddy King, you know, I mean, all of these people he would be bringing through to speak to us, you know, and stuff like that. And so I'm driving Dr. Shannon, and he is asking me about my future plans. And I'm like, oh, I'm on the way to Harvard, you know. And he said, really? And I said, yeah. And so he said, well, have you ever considered going to an HBCU? And I said, not really. And he said, well, I noticed all of your background is in majority institutions. I said, yeah, and I'm on my way to Harvard. Did you hear that part? You know? And he said, well, I would like to suggest you consider going to an HBCU. And I said, why would I do that? And he said, because if you're going to be ministering to primarily African-American people in the diaspora, you need to know something about their experience, and no place can teach you better than an HBCU. And I said, and this is a quote, Doc, I've been black all my life. I said, I know everything there is to know about being black, right? But he persisted, he understood, he entertained my ignorance, and he invited me to come and visit. So first, my wife and I went to Harvard, and they wined and dined us. It was everything that Harvard represents. But it was Boston. As a big city, we had little children. We would be alone. So then we went to Richmond, and we visited Virginia Union. And it was not what we expected. They didn't have the resources, the building, the faculty, none of that. But in the hotel room that night, when we prayed, both of us felt like, even though we couldn't explain it, we were supposed to be in Richmond. And that's how we got there. I finished the master's in August 1983. We moved in September 1983. And I started at Virginia Union in September 1983. But that's how I got there, you know. But my experience with Fred Sampson was phenomenal. Yeah. He taught me to love learning for its own sake. Not as a means to an end, but for its own sake. He used to read 2 books every week. I tried to maintain that discipline, but I keep falling off the wagon, and then the wagon roll over me and drag me down the road. But he was able to maintain that discipline. He used to do what he called sidewalk theology, you know, because he had this phrase, and I'll tell you how I remember so many of his phrases in a moment. He said, God can be found in the commonplace. Jesus appears in the presence of the seemingly unholy, and the Holy Ghost cruises the community seeking with whom he can communicate. You know, that's a Fred Sampsonism right there. You know? He'd come up with stuff like that. But I used to sit with him at Mom's Kitchen, and this is a hole in the wall, but they serve red beans and rice and the best homemade biscuits you ever tasted. And he would be writing sermons on napkins, you know, and stuff like that. But how I learned a lot of his thought was Doc used to have a 6:30 Sunday morning a.m. contemporary theology class called Dawn Seekers. And I used to take notes because I was trying, you know, when you're in the beginning of your ministry and you have your heroes, you don't want to be like them. You want to be them, you know. So I'm like, I'm going to get every word this man said so I could sound profound like without knowing any of the background.
Right.
And that got me in trouble once because I made one of his statements and couldn't defend it, you know. But I was taking notes and he saw my notes. And he said, you do this every Sunday? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I think you should distribute them to the class. So that started a 3-year period of me taking notes, typing them up, distributing them to the classes. We had binders full of Doc stuff, 3 of them. And I don't know what happened to him because when I got ready to go to seminary, he told me to turn them over to one of the pastors there, and I did. And his thought was he was going to have them published, you know, but he had some great stuff. He was a great guy, great man. And he was personally invested in us because on more than one occasion, I remember I came to work and it was time for me to register for school, but I didn't have the money. And so I'm trying to play it off like nothing's going on, but Doc came through and he's like, have your classes started? I'm like, no, you know. Well, what are you taking? Well, I'm not going this semester. Why not? You know, I don't have the money. He said, how much you owe? And I told him. And so he walked out the room. He came back later that day. Pop, 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 pop. Counted out the money in $100 bills. Said, go register. So he was personally invested. Now, what I didn't understand, he said it to me, I just didn't know the depth of it. He said, remember your blessings obligate you. So now, our scholarship efforts, when we do that, I always think about him. You know, that he was a person who invested in me and I'm obligated to invest in others. But he was an incredible mentor, great teacher, great pastor, preacher, friend.
So I'm going back to St. Paul. I ain't got to St. Paul yet. I'm in Richmond.
Yes.
So take me to St. Paul.
Okay, my journey, and strangely enough, I got to Richmond in September '85, and I was interning as youth minister under Roscoe Cooper Jr. at 5th Street. Roscoe, of course, gave me great opportunity. One of them is the opportunity to preach. So I would preach like on Wednesday night per assignment and stuff like that. You know what you have to do as a seminary intern. And the chairperson of his trustee group was Clarence Drayton. Clarence Drayton worked for Defense General Supply as a manager, and one of his department leads was a lady named Jane Smith. Jane Smith says to Clarence Drayton, Clarence, my pastor resigned. Do you know any preachers we could get to come over to St. Paul's and preach for us? He said, and this is a quote, I don't know his name. He said, but this little guy preached for us in chapel from Detroit. You ought to get him. And I started going there. in September '83 as the supply preacher. And I didn't think anything of it. I mean, it's an opportunity to preach, and I got there, and, they were a little cold. They weren't in the charismatic Pentecostal Baptist wing, they were in the old school, traditional, Orthodox pipe organ, robes on, hymnals, that type of thing. But, it was an opportunity to exercise my gift and work on the craft. So I would go over there maybe every other month, sometimes twice a month, and I would be preaching over there. And I got to know the people pretty good. Because I had children and I was in seminary, I had to work and go to school. So I had a midnight shift job working for Dictograph Security Systems. And one of their clients was St. Paul's Baptist Church. So back in the day, technology was not what it is now. Whenever it stormed, everybody's alarm would go off. So you have to call the key holders in the middle of the night, get them to go out there and reset the alarm. And so I'd be calling the chairman of the deacons, chairman of the trustees, and stuff like that. So when I went over there to preach, chairman of the deacons said, "Man, your voice sounds familiar." I said, "Yeah, I'm the dude you're talking to in the middle of the night," And he said, okay. So we got to know each other. Doc knew I was ending seminary because I was going to the day school and the night school because I had children. So that was my urgency. I got to get out, right? And I finished the 3-year program in 2 years. So I was finished in '85. And I said to Doc, I'm done. My intention was to move back to Detroit and take a position on his staff. So he said, "Well, I'd like for you to be, director of Christian Ed because Mr. Johnson is going to retire." So I'm good with that. My last preaching assignment was at St. Paul's for their homecoming. And when I walked in, Deacon Thomas Leakos, God bless his memory, he's dead and gone now, he said, "Reverend, we're having a church meeting today." And I said, "Good, I'll be praying for y'all." He said, "I'm going to put your name up." I said, "For what?" He said, "To be the next pastor of the church." I said, "No, Doc." I said, "I love y'all great people and all of that, I said, "But I'm on my way back to Detroit. I've already taken the job." He said, "Well, if it ain't for you, they won't vote for you, right?" And I said, but he said, "No, if it ain't for you, they won't vote for you." He said, "Beside that, I talked to the mother of the church, Deaconess Marian Watts, who was a deaconess at St. Paul's for 75 years. He said, and she told me that the Lord told her that you're the next pastor." So how am I gonna argue? I'm like, okay, do what you do, And they put me up. 140 people voted. 20 of them voted against me because they thought I was too young. 120 voted for me. And I started the next month. When I called Doc, it was interesting because I said, "Doc, I got to talk to you about this, And I told him that they had called me and stuff like that. And he said, "Well, I knew you weren't coming back." He said, "I just needed the Lord to show you." Wow. And so I started there in September 1985, and I've been there 38 years. I've had the opportunity to pastor every size church. Because when I first came, we were worshiping just over 100 people. So I pastored a small church, pastored a medium church, large church, mega church, multi-site church. So I've had many different pastorates in this one church. But it's kind of like being married a long time. If you stay married a long time and focus on having a soulmate, S-O-L-E, versus and a soulmate, S-O-U-L, you get to be with a variety of different women because, your wife ain't the same, The girl I married is not the woman to whom I'm married now, And so churches operate like that.
So talk to me about preaching. I think, many of our viewers want to know, how do you prepare a sermon? How does Lance Watson prepare a sermon?
Oh, Lord. Okay. Let's come at it like this. First of all, I have a love affair with preaching. at this stage of my life, nothing in my life has been with me longer than preaching, because I started so young.
Right.
I believe preaching can change the world. Not just any preaching, though, okay? Because some of what is labeled preaching, I wouldn't call preaching. And that's just me and maybe my limitations, okay? But when I go about the task, I always try to approach it first with prayer, because I want to speak what I believe in and am convicted that God is leading me to speak. And so I try to bathe the task in prayer. Pray before I prepare. Pray while I'm preparing. Pray once I'm done preparing. And then pray before I present. You know, if this ain't it, you know, then give me in the moment what it is, okay? But sermons for me can come from anywhere. And that may be part of the legacy of Fred Sampson, because everything preached to Doc.
Yes, you did.
You know, all the time. And so sometimes I'll start with the text and it'll arise out of my devotional life. Sometimes it starts with an idea. Sometimes it starts with an experience, because I have the quadrilateral too. I'm trying to balance reason and experience, scripture and tradition, you know, and figure out which comes first. And it's shifted during the course of my ministry, because initially in those early churches, their theology was fundamentally evangelical, and in some cases fundamentalists and literalists, right? And so I was a part of that tradition where it's not just solo scriptoria, it is nothing else matters, you know? If it ain't written, it ain't real, you know, and that type of thing. And so my quadrilateral has shifted over time.
So let me, for the audience, say this is the Wesleyan quadrilateral.
Yes.
That the Wesley brothers put together. It's reason, tradition, scripture, and experience. So just so that the audience knows.
Yes, yes. And those four sources inform our theology, right? And so in the beginning, I was more fundamentalist, dogmatic, literalist, and that shifted over time. So now I'll get a sermonic idea from just about anywhere. I am a hopeless serial preacher and have been so for 25 of the 38 years that I've been at St. Paul's. So I tend to get an idea for a series of messages. Okay. And I think it's valuable for a number of reasons. One is people don't come to church every Sunday, so they don't hear you every week. So doing a solo message, while it may be what you feel led to do, there's a high chance that a majority of the people who attend your church are not going to hear it because they're not there that week. Right. But a series of sermons gives you the opportunity to develop a theme, an idea, a thought over a number of weeks. Yeah. And so I'm hopelessly committed to that. Yeah. So I'll start with prayer, then I get the idea and I try and crystallize it in my mind. What is it that you are going after? If I had to name my preaching style, I'm trying to do artistic persuasion. Because if you listen to my messages over time, I'm always driving people to do something. I'm trying to persuade you. And the art comes through the use of language, through the use of image, through the use of metaphor. So I start with the idea or the scripture. I then, of course, go to exegesis of the text, and I'm trying to make sure that I clearly understand in its context what it was the text was trying to communicate to the original audience. Yes. Then I build bridges in my notes from that audience to my audience, which is where the exegetical process is so critical, because you can't say what it means until you say what it did mean, you know? And after I have the exegesis, I'll usually create some type of outline. On my pieces of paper, it really doesn't look like number 1, number 2, number 3. What I am fond of is drawing maps. Because in my head, I see myself as taking you on a journey. Wow. Yeah. because I want to point out some stuff that ain't a part of the main destination. But I'd be like, look at that rose bush. Okay, let's keep going, you know, and that type of thing. You know, so I have a lot of those, you know. Did you notice that butterfly, you know, and that type of thing. And it really may not be related thematically to the main flow of the message, but it makes the journey beautiful.
Yes.
You know, and that for me is too part of Doc's legacy in my life, because he was very artistic in terms of his preaching form, you know. So I'll create a map, and if I showed it to you like on a piece of paper, you would literally see an arrow where I'm drawing, oh, here, over there, you know. And then when I'm editing, I'll be like, okay, this belongs to 1A, this belongs to 1B, you know, and that type of thing. And I'll move stuff around, and I'll write a first draft. Now, I am a manuscript preacher, straight up, no holes, no bar. I own it. I've done some of all types of preaching. I mean, I remember one time after hearing Jasper Williams preach, I tried to preach no manuscript, no Bible, no nothing, just straight from memory, right? And it was at a youth service for White Rock Baptist Church in Detroit. Now, why do I remember that so well, right? I got up, and it was a nightmare, right? And so the pastor was very kind. He waited till we got back in the office, and he said, young man, I suggest you never do that again. And I didn't, you know, but I've done some of everything, you know, from preaching with no notes, no Bible, preaching with an outline, preaching with index cards, preaching with a folded piece of paper that I pulled out and the whole sermon was there, you know, to now what I call a coded oral manuscript. Because if I showed you my manuscript, wow, I have a code. Yes. That is part of my memorization scheme. Okay, so after I've written my first draft, and my daughter and my wife always get on me about this, I am constantly editing and re-editing and re-editing, trying to say better what I've said. We do multiple services, and I edit between the service. This transition wasn't good, you know, delete this, save this for another time, and that sort of thing. So my manuscript is never complete. It's always a work in progress, and I'm learning something as I'm presenting it. But if you looked at it on paper, on iPad, you'd notice that there are colors. So all of my title sentences are highlighted in yellow. My verbs are highlighted in green. And that aids me because I'm trying to maintain eye contact while I preach. Right. And so like people will often say, when do you look down? I didn't even see you looking down. But what they don't know is that when I look down and see that title sentence, I can go 3 paragraphs before I need to look down again. Okay, and that's what I mean by a coded manuscript, you know, so, and then I'm praying afterwards, and I do a lot of revivals, and I am a fan. Manuel Scott Sr. once said that preaching that is not reheatable is not repeatable. Meaning, if it was good enough to preach the first time, it's good enough to preach again. And so when I'm preaching revivals and stuff like that, you know, I'll preach some messages that I have done, and they are in process, even on the road, because a different environment will bring different things out of you and even cause you to see different things in the text.
So tell me about a time that it was the most difficult preaching moment for you.
The most difficult preaching moments for me at any time during the entire time I've been preaching have been moments of personal pain. To go to the pulpit broken. And part of that is my struggle with the need to feel secure and in control. And in those moments, my vulnerability and my frailty are foremost and can't be hidden. And I don't like that Okay, I mean, ain't no need in me lying just because the camera rolling. I don't like that. I like being in control. I like being in charge and stuff like that. But part of the way in which God has spiritually developed me over time and continues is, and I've got this written in my journal, is God allows me, like everybody else, to have moments of brokenness, moments of vulnerability, moments of grief, moments of loss, moments of pain, of confusion, of doubt, you know. And I wrote in my journal, and I thought that that would kind of satiate this, but it didn't. It just made me aware of it. Because it was 25 years ago I wrote my journal, what I felt God was saying to me, and it was this, that I know if you could, you would do this without me. But I refuse to let you.
Yeah.
You know, and that is so true of me, you know, that self-sufficiency instinct, you know, and the desire to control the elements. Less than a month ago, I was preaching a sermon on worry, and I was broken. I mean, and I'm preaching with cracked voice, you know, and it's terrible, man. You know, you want to come strong, you know, don't come at all, you know, and my voice was cracking, and I'm like hating myself while this is going on, all this happening in my mind. And it was a sermon about worry. And I got to the end, and I started talking to the congregation, and I said, it was tough for me to preach this today. I said, because God allowed me to live this experience. I said, it's different when you live it versus just talking about it. And I said, this week I had to face the fact that I worry, and that I worry all the time. I worry about y'all. I worry about this church. I worry about my family, worry about my health, worry about the future. I said, and as much as I tell you to trust God, truth is, in the middle of the night, I'm laying awake, worried about something going on, right? And I said, and I might be by myself. I said, but I don't think I am. I said, if you worry like me, I said, would you come to the altar? You know, we just gonna pray together about it. You know, no easy fix, right? We just gonna pray. Man, it was hundreds of people at the altar, and hundreds of men, and men, women, children, teenagers, you know. And it was comforting, but at the same time, you know, I didn't like the experience, you know, of having to be broken, and so you praying and it sound like you crying, you know, that type of thing, you know. But it was necessary. So those moments are hard for me to preach.
Let's go to the other side. When was there a time that you thought and felt that God really used you more than you ever could have dreamed that God would use you?
Believe it or not, I usually only see those moments in retrospect, and they're brought to my attention by other people. The way my personality is shaped, and that may be a psychosis, I don't know, okay? But the way my personality is shaped is I don't spend, or have not in my life, spent a lot of time celebrating things that have happened.
Right.
And that's a bad thing, you know, because you do need to smell the roses while it's happening, right? But it's the way that my personality developed is my joy has always been found in the pursuit of it, not the acquisition. Right. So it is pursuing a great sermonic moment that gives me joy. So once it's over, I'm like, okay, next, you know, and that type of, and it's only afterwards when people come, like the young man who stopped me in the airport and said, you don't know me, but you saved my life. And he proceeds to tell this story about growing up in the projects and hearing me preach, and I forget how he even heard me preach, you know, and he went on and found his way to college and became a chemist and is now doing this with his life and this with his family and has kids and has grandkids and things like that, you know. And he said, or we are starting in partnership with one of the major hospital systems in our community, a mini medical program for children to interest them in medical careers while they're young. And a young lady gets on the phone who is in a director position for this major hospital system. And she said, before we start, she said, you don't know me, but I know you. Mm-hmm. And I said, how do you know me? And she said, I was a freshman in high school, struggling in a bad situation with scant resources and little family support. And a young preacher came to my high school and said, and she quoted it, you have the power to seize the hour to rise up and live your dream. She said, and that one statement put me through high school, college, medical school, right? And she said, that young preacher was you. She said, now, let's talk about this program you want to start, right? So looking back, you're like, man, that one word, that it was just an assignment. Right. God used it, And I'm really, to be honest, skeptical about making assessments of my own work. And I'll tell you why. Because usually the sermons I think, man, you did it today. If you never do it, was really a bomb. Right. And the ones that I think nobody like that, is something that God is going to use in a kingdom way to change somebody's life.
Wow. Tell me about your preaching at the Hampton Ministers Conference experience.
It was amazing and it was terrifying. You remember we talked before I preached, right? And I was approaching it all wrong. And can I say that on here? I mean, just in all honesty, because I'm thinking, okay, it's Hampton, you got to come, like many young preachers, you got to come up with something new, something fresh, something novel, something catchy, something people going to remember forever and ever. And I told you about that. We were on the phone and I said, yeah, I'm working on something new. And you said, man, are you crazy? And I said, what do you mean? He said, that ain't the place to break in a new horse. That's the place to go take a horse that is going to run the Preakness, and win the Triple Crown. And I thank God for that advice. I thank God for you. I thank God I listened, and it was an amazing experience. First of all, it was incredibly humbling because sitting on that stage with 10,000 other preachers in the room, if you have any sane estimate of yourself, you know that you are not there because you deserve to be. Right. That it's purely an opportunity of the grace of God, and the goodness of people, to say, we're going to extend this to you. Because that could be anybody. Right. Okay, especially in that room. Yeah, especially. Okay. Yeah. And so I was incredibly humbled. I was totally terrified. And you know how the old saints used to say, he'll speak peace to your soul. Yeah. Well, during that time, we had began to have our New Year's Eve services in the Coliseum in Richmond. Mm-hmm. So there'd be 10,000 people in the Arthur Ashe Center, in the Siegel Center, in the Richmond Coliseum. And sitting there in the midst of my terror, the Lord spoke to my mind and said, this is just like New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. And all the lessons I had learned came back to me, meaning in that room, you can't preach for eye contact because you can't see nobody. Right. It's just faces in the crowd. You ain't making eye contact. You can't preach for sound because you may or may not be able to hear yourself adequately. Right. So you have to create a space around you to be able to present in, or you get lost in the moment. And then you really got to preach with conviction. You got to pray a lot, and you have to resist. And this is hard, but I'm going to say it. You have to resist theatrics. Mm-hmm. Because while it is theatrical, that can be dangerous on a stage like that.
Yeah. It's not natural.
No.
And we don't feel what you... Yes.
Right. And so you up there jumping up and down, you done hollered your voice out and they're like, okay, do you have anything to say, or was it an accident?
Or you taking us down a road that you didn't take us with you.
Right.
How did you get there? Right. And we'll go with you, but we just want to go. Right.
we'd have missed a lot of stops on the expressway, you know.
You went on the express train, we on the local, right?
Yes,
right,
yes.
right. One of the things that I really want to thank you for is you were a donor to the PhD program. And it's one thing to do a program, and it's another thing to do a program with support of the people who've been with you all the way. And it meant the world to me personally that you all would come together and do a scholarship in the name of Dr. Sampson. So I want to thank you for that. It was just an amazing gift that you all have made. And I say, you know, you all, because there are two other people, but I'm talking to you, so I'm gonna call your name, and I'm gonna call anybody else's name because they may not want their name to be called, but I just want you to know. And so I want you to just tell me about your thoughts about the PhD program and that you would become a donor to the program and what it meant to you.
Well, first I want to thank you on camera, as I have privately, for your work in this space, because I think that the black preacher, the black pulpit, black preaching is and has been an undervalued resource in the transformation of human community. And I use those words intentionally, not just the black community, of human community. And so, as I was sharing with you, I think it's a very, very important work to which God has called you and that you are doing faithfully and with integrity. And so I was honored to be asked to make a donation, particularly in honor and memory of my mentor, who meant so much to me, you know, that it felt like an opportunity to give to him a little bit of what he gave me, because I could never replace what he gave me. I could never match it. Because part of my testimony about him was that intellectually, Fred Sampson raised me from the dead. You know, that I was Lazarus, and he called me, Lance, come forth. You know, so it was a great honor, you know, to be able to donate. And I think the work is so critical, not just for the seminary and the academy, but as I said, for the development of human community, and particularly for sharing the resource that has been black preaching from all of its various strains, right? One of the huge contributions of Jeremiah Wright, who I know was one of your mentors and one of mine, that he gave to me through his example as well as his tutelage, was the ability to merge and integrate the fragmented parts of my culture and my background. And to see the bridges between sacred and secular, and how they merge together and interacted with each other, and to be able to own them and not be ashamed of them, but to create other categories as compared to good and bad. Let's talk about healthy and destructive, you know, which is language, but it speaks to the power of language, which is why I love wordsmithing. You know, I love creating phrases that people have not heard. And so the opportunity to contribute to a program that was going to look at rhetoric and the power of rhetoric, sacred rhetoric, and the significance of that, black preaching and sacred rhetoric, you know, was indeed an honor and an opportunity for me to hopefully contribute to the next generation of preachers, pursuing not only that level of scholarship, but that level of practice, so that what we have done and what others have done will be appreciated by the world. Because it takes some gumption. That's a Mississippi word, okay? And I know we both have roots in Mississippi. Okay, it takes some gumption to bridge a seminary trained pulpit with a straight up folk hooper. You know, and for years, there was a competition between the two. Which one is real preaching and which one is legitimate? And to be able to say in this space, both are legitimate. And both have functions, you know, because I mentioned C.L. Franklin. I got to tell you this Charles Adams story about C.L. Franklin, because Dr. Adams was one of my mentors as well. And over lunch, he's telling me this story about C.L. Franklin and when the Black Power movement and Black theology first came to the forefront. Dr. Charles Gilchrist Adams said Dr. C.L. Franklin called him and said, Charles, tell me about this Black theology. Tell me about Black preaching. And Dr. Adams said, I'll do better than that, Doc. I'll write you a bibliography. So he wrote down 25 books and gave it to him. And he said, now honestly, gave it to him with the thought that, that'd be the end of the discussion. The next week, Franklin calls him and says, Charles, I've read all 25 of those books. Can we have a discussion? Right? Which undermines the idea that people have about Hoopers, right?
That's exactly it.
And when you listen to him, you'll hear his messages spiced with social justice and with a consciousness about the poor and how things were unfolding in the church and in the world and in the government, and how the gospel intersected all of those different elements and levels, So it takes some gumption to do what you do.
Thank you, sir.
But I'm glad you're making this gumbo.
I thank you. It's last question. I've asked you a bunch of questions. You can say whatever you would like to say, whatever the Lord leads you to say. Many people watch these. Many people across the globe watch these. There's such a fascination with African American preaching across the globe. It absolutely amazes me. So many of those are trying to improve their preaching, but also very seasoned people. We have a broad and a wide audience. And with all of your years of experience, your pastoring, your revival schedules, the teaching, the preaching, the ups and the downs, the overs and the unders, I want to just open up a space for you to say to our audience whatever the Lord leads you to say. So I have no question. That's my statement. And I'll say, we turn the pulpit over to
for the benediction.
Right. Come in your own way, right?
Wrap it up. Right. Come on, bring it home, son. Well, let me be artistically persuasive for the benefit of the people who are watching, and particularly the preachers.
Yes.
One of the greatest, I don't want to get emotional, confidences that the Lord has given me. And I'm a journalist, so I write in journals. And I wrote this down. That when I was struggling at a point in my ministry, I'm trying to find my own voice and my own style and my own this and my own that. And I wrote these words that I felt God was saying to me, that you are a unique, unrepeatable manifestation of the will of God. You are what people will hear when God clears his throat. You're already loved.
Right.
You're already chosen.
Yes.
Live in that. And that's what I want to say to preachers who are watching.
Well, that's what your preaching does. Your preaching says that to people all throughout your life, all throughout the preaching ministry of the years I've known you. And God bless you. Just keep preaching. And, the best is yet to come. There's more. So, we'll experience it together, but there is more for both of us. So.
And I want to say to you, as Ray Charles, that inimitable R&B prophet, once said, make it do what it do.
Thank you, my brother.
Bless
Thank you.
you,
Bless
man.
you.
It's
Thank
been
you.
a joy to be here.
It's been a joy to have you.